Estamos
Hello,
esperando
good morning, everyone. We are going to wait for a few more minutes for everyone to join. We'll be starting shortly. Thank you. Well, it seems everyone's here. Let's begin. Welcome, everyone. First of all, let me tell you that we are recording the session, both the version in English and Spanish, so that it can be reviewed by everyone at UNESCO Santiago. So you can have the interpretation into English or Spanish down below in your Zoom bar, and you will click on the globe icon and choose English or Spanish. Welcome once again for this second webinar for the series for the Education for Sustainable Development, Nature-Based Solutions for the Biospheres in Latin America. This is framed in the mangrove restoration of mangroves in by UNESCO through the world with the support of the Flanders government here with us with a few words. So let me pass on the word to Juana Jimenez for welcoming words. Thank you, Christian, for introducing us. We are so glad to be here. As you mentioned, I come from the Marine Flanders Institute. This is in Belgium. We are supporting with scientific cooperation for nature-based solutions. And now we're working with this program of biospheres, which is so relevant to include not only scientific knowledge, but also knowledge about communities from local scientists, from the world of academia, from the universities, and also to provide support together with the government and the managers of the biospheres. Let me mention that there is a big component on education, and this is the connection with education for sustainable development. It is very important for all progress to be made, to be kept at each university, locality, and reserve. Work is continued to be shared and harnessed. I'm happy to see my colleagues, Juan Carlos and Lázaro. We were together at Sunflower and at the Biosphere in Colombia, sharing there, and we saw there how relevant this media is, as we cannot be present there today. We can continue to keep in touch and sharing with you. I hope we're going to have a great session today. Thank you so much, Juana. It's so important what you're saying. A few weeks ago, we had a technical meeting for the project with different representatives and managers from reserves, promoted scientific knowledge sharing as regards mangroves, but also for their role in the community. That is key within the advantages and special features the project has, and how education is the vehicle that promotes the appreciation of all of the environments and to appreciate the knowledge from the past as well. Now Juan Criado from the UNESCO office at San Jose, so that he can introduce everyone in the panel. Juan, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Juana, for your introductory words to this second seminar. As it was well expressed, we're going to discuss experiences of conservation, restoration, and recovery of mangroves as in relation to nature-based solutions and international cooperation. That is a way that's a bit different to approach the big challenges we're all facing with a different approach, more in harmony with our environment. And you know, it's one of the mandates and the main view of the MAP program of the Men on Biosphere in a global manner. We here have today the presence and participation of three extraordinary representatives that will tell us about two biosphere research participating in the project in Mexico, La Encrucijada, and Cuba at Guanacabibes Peninsula. At Encrucijada, we were able to have the first event on the ground for the mangroves program. It was very pleasant to meet you all and to see the reality of the reserve and the approach and vision of nature-based solutions and challenges presented on the ground. We also have here with us Gabriela Garcia. She is the national coordinator of the Nature for Cities program from Cuba. She coordinates in Cuba, but she has been working for the United Nations program for the environment. So I don't want to take any more time. I know Gabriela will share their experience in Nature for Cities and will tell us about nature-based solutions. This concept that has been presented also at the UN meeting for the environment. Concept was presented a few years ago. It was quite a revolution how these mangroves ecosystems can approach these nature-based solutions for preservation and tackling the climate change. She is an architect with a master's degree in development and integration, and from 2021, she's working in the regional Nature for Cities program for nature-based solutions for the UN Program for the Environment. She specializes in community welfare, the social interaction, and sustainable development. Gabriela, we hear you. Thank you. Thank you, Juan, for your introduction and everyone for this invitation to this webinar. If you allow me, I will be sharing my screen. Please let me know once you can see my presentation. Now we see it, Gabriela. All right. So thank you. As Juan was saying, I will be telling you about lessons learned as from Nature for Cities at Manzanillo, Cuba. We're working at two different cities in Manzanillo and Camagüey in Cuba, but Manzanillo is the shore city that we're working with. We're working with nature-based solutions for the impacts of climate change in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's cutting off. There is no sound. Gabriela, we don't hear you. Your connection is cutting off. Let me share the screen. Let me do that. If not, we will remove the cameras. Let's try that. If not, I can turn off my camera. You please let me know if my connection is bad once again. I'm going to repeat this explanation. 44% of the national territory is located in fragile ecosystems, where 27% of the population lives in the shoreland ecosystems. That's why we're working in nature-based solutions in our country and in other Latin American cities and the Caribbean, working as from the project. Next slide. What are the nature-based solutions and what is our approach? Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, conserve, restore, and use sustainably and natural or modified ecosystems to tackle the issues in an adaptive manner for the human well-being services for the ecosystem, resilience, and benefits for the biodiversity. This is the concept from the UN for the environment in 2022. We're working in ecosystems-based adaptation for Latin American cities. Next, please. What criteria do we have? First, to help people to adjust to climate change, reducing the social and environmental vulnerability and generating benefits for the society in the context of adapting to climate change. Restoring, maintaining, or improving health in the ecosystem. The projects are based on municipalities strengthening their urban development plans and municipal ordering with the introduction of systems in their municipal strategies. And the fifth pillar is governance and strengthening of local and national governments for adapting these components at the different decision-making levels. Next, please. The project, as I was saying, covers 7 Latin American cities that we see and tries to reduce the vulnerability to climate change through nature-based solutions with a participatory project of key stakeholders at the local level and with the support of external support, international support for the risk diagnosis, nature-based solutions, and the implementation of solutions aligned with the changes that are developed at municipal level. Next, please. For this, we'll be starting in this type of analysis made by experts in the country with local environmental policies developed by the country that are very much aligned with the ecosystems-based adaptation. With this, we consulted stakeholders with different participatory workshops to analyze critical points in both cities, in this case, Manzanillo. So we'll go more in detail about these critical points for the restoration of mangroves. With this, we have the analysis and validation of the data, and now we are with a plan based on nature, working on territorial and urban ordering. Next, please. All right, so in these critical points, we have detected, I don't have the mouse, but maybe you can help me. In the area of Cacheria, we have the reef barrier protecting Manzanillo, and we have identified that in the fishing area, in the fishing city that you see the left in the map, and the red area that's marked here were the ones more prone to flooding according to the local experience. Then we'll see the projections for climate change. In this area to the right of the city, we have a rice mill with generating shells from the rice going to the sea.
Ah, bueno, listo. Definimos 4 principales impactos del cambio climático para la ciudad. Ahora me voy a estar enfocando en el aumento del nivel medio del mar y los cambios por eventos extremos. Y los cambios en los eventos extremos, ya sea por penetraciones de la cuña salina o extremas sequías o extremas inundaciones. Y bueno,
drought and floods. We have been working, but there have been also other nature-based solutions for the increase in temperature and the annual rainfall. Next. All right. In relation to sea floodings, because of the rising of the sea or other weather variables, we have been considering different scenarios for 2030 and 2050, considering where there were the schools and hospitals at risk in the flooded area. We also covered the location of the different ecosystems, mangroves, reefs, etc., that would allow for the regulation of the sea level, supporting biodiversity in the shoreline to Manzanillo Tributa area, and what would be the services from the ecosystem for reducing the saline intrusion and the flooding from the sea. In a second participatory workshop, we have been working in identifying all of the nature-based solutions or mixed solutions to solve these aspects, non-structural actions required, and some gray infrastructure that were required. We also identify additional challenges, pollution due to solid waste or the rice byproduct, and we have identified previous solutions for the rehabilitation of mangroves and reforestation. The project Mi Costa, My Coast by the PNUD is UNDP is working at Manzanilla already since 2020 for the shore area with communities-based adaptation, and in Manzanillo, the company Flora is working identifying fragile ecosystems and then reforesting several of them. And going now into the mangroves recovery.
Why did we decide this was the most appropriate solution for coastal protection, Manzanillo? The combination of the mangrove restoration together with coral reef restoration and marine grass restoration together with urban restoration towards more resilient housing can reduce the impacts of climate change. Reefs reduce, for example, the energy of waves up to 97%, grass it reduces up to 50%, and mangroves up to 66%. In Manzanillo, the purpose was to choose 4 nature-based solutions implemented in the city. So we chose restoration of mangroves and coral reefs and marine grass for the mid and long terms. Besides, they were selected because they have cool benefits related to fishing resources and they are shelters for biodiversity. So we based on several case studies. Sorry, but her connection is frozen. In 3 Latin American countries. In this case, in Jamaica, we worked on mangrove restoration and carbon capture, erosion and sedimentation control, moderation of climate events, food supply, benefits coming from recreation ecotourism, habitat for species, water supplies, and wood supply. And at the same time, climate risks were also addressed. Besides the social and environmental benefits mentioned, they are feasible from an economic standpoint. These benefits include the preservation and restoration, which are 10 times higher to the costs, and they account for lots of savings, and mangroves contribute to benefits for fisheries, recreation, and others. As you can see, the economic and social variables, as well as environmental variables, make restoration a feasible option. That's why it became a priority in Manzanillo, and they're also aligned with the public policies in the city and in the country right now. 70% of the coasts in the country are covered by mangroves currently. And for those reasons, the country considers that restoring them is a priority. However, recent studies in Manzanillo have detected up to February 2022, in our first workshop, that almost 600 hectares of mangroves had been lost in Huacanayabo Gulf. These represent a high percentage of the marine ecosystem loss. That's why the city has been working in the restoration even before the international projects have been implemented. And we are now supporting a process that is ongoing, an ongoing process, and we are providing technical training, we are providing support to the implementation of public policies, and we are integrating them with environmental policies, and we are providing financial aid too, together with the Green Fund for Climate. These are some of the images of the rehabilitation and reforestation process in Manzanillo. And these are some images of the trainings held during the last years. Several training courses were conducted for technicians and advisors, but as from Mi Costa project, which is community-based, this training is also addressed to the population. This is a summer training for fishermen who live in the littoral area, most of them in one of these areas that is considered critical, resulting from floods and hurricanes. These workshops are done in order to show the benefits on mangroves and to provide support to fishermen in the reforestation of mangroves, because they work on the ecosystem and they can have direct impact on them. This is the approach that we have taken, that is based on 3 critical items. One of them is the integration with all public policies in the city. The second one is training for key decision makers and for the community. And the third one, of course, is action. The implementation of these actions in the long, mid, and short terms. I would like to conclude with a short 1-minute video. But if I cannot share with you, I will post it on the chat for you to watch it later on. This includes an explanation on how mangroves are beneficial for climate change. I will post it on the chat because I cannot share it with you now. You cannot click on it, right? No, it's not working. Okay, so I will post it on the chat so that you can watch it. and because it includes lots of nature-based solutions. I will post the link for you to watch it later. So thank you very much. Thank you, Gabriela, for your presentation. And such an exhaustive presentation about all the research in Cuba and all the work that you are planning to implement in 7 cities in Latin America and the Caribbean. And thank you for that holistic approach that of course, analyzes long-term measures, such as working with marine grass and coral reefs. Because mangroves are very important in all the coastal system in Cuba, both to protect the coast against climate change, such as floods, for example, and also to protect biodiversity and for communities. Thank you. I think we will have a Q&A session at the end once the 3 presentations conclude. So thank you, Gabriela. Now we will move on to the next presentation, the second presentation by Juan Carlos Castro. He is the director of the Biosphere Reserve, La Encrucijada. He's a biologist and he has a master's in natural resources and rural development and works in the National Commission of Protected Areas from Mexico. He has been working on different biosphere reserves projects, also in Chiapas, such as El Triunfo. Thank you, Juan Carlos. You have the floor. So you can take the 15 minutes because we are good with time. Thank you, Juan. Thank you to all our colleagues from UNESCO for giving me this chance. I will try to share my screen and you let me know if it's okay. I think, yes, we can see it correctly. I will talk about the different approaches towards restoration of mangroves of the La Encrucijada Biosphere Reserve, of course, with this funding from Flanders and support from UNESCO. Local communities need to participate and we need to change the way of working and addressing things in the reserve, but also outside the reserve. This is the map of Mexico, including the biosphere reserves on Man and the biosphere in the Man and Biosphere program. And La Encrucijada is located to the south of our country. It is the southernmost reserve in the country, and it's next to the coast of Chiapas, to the state of Chiapas, which is parallel to the Sierra Madre in Chiapas. Sorry, but his connection is not good. It's being cut. We cannot hear what he's saying.
Hacia el norte, donde está la Sierra Madre de Chiapas.
Here you can see Chiapas, Sierra Madre, where El Triunfo Reserve is located. And these basins are located at a very short distance. They are at even more than 10,000 meters from sea level, between 30 and 40 kilometers apart. Here you can see Volcán Tacana Reserve, which is larger, and they also share it also shares a basin with that reserve. La Encrucijada has 48,000 hectares, and these include the buffer zone and the core zone. If we consider the transition zone, it's a lot wider, over 245,000 hectares. There are 60 communities located within this biosphere reserve, with a population of 17,000. And in the transition zone, there are 278,000 people. The mangroves at La Encrucijada, I mean, we love them, we really like them. They're pretty high. They are up to 40 meters high in some areas of the reserve. And we estimate through satellite images that there are 30,000 hectares of mangroves across this reserve. However, they are subject to strong pressures. There are different species, Rhizophora mangle, Cunuparpus. There are others, but these four are the main ones. We also estimate that there is a potential to restore 2,000 hectares of mangroves that have been affected by different causes. There are sites that are being invaded by Palma africana. Some others, there's a dredging by the bulls. These tarquinas are also places for restoration, and there are lands that have been invaded for cattle breeding, and that activity shouldn't take place there. So we plan to recover them for mangroves.
En la zona, la gente vive principalmente.
In the region, people are mainly fishermen. There are 14 cooperatives. There's one that is a mid-sized cooperative. There are some cooperatives devoted to tourism, providing transportation by speedboats from mangroves to restaurants. Cooperatives that receive tourists, that provide lodging and food. There's also extraction of wild fauna for this is legal, this is for self-supply. However, there's some portion of illegal trade of crocodiles. There's also wood extraction. Sorry, his connection is being cut. This wood is used for fishing arts, and it's illegally sold for posts in cattle breeding areas.
Al manglar en la reserva de la biosfera de la Encrucijada, hay una que es emergente, que no estaba prevista.
There's one that is emergent. Several decades ago, there was African palm or oil palm crops. And there are also some plantations inside the reserve in the buffer area. The invasive capacity of this species was unknown, so nobody paid much attention to it. Even the management plan indicates that in some sites it is not banned, since when La Encrucijada was set up, there were different plantations. However, in these last 15 years, up to 5 or 6 years ago, there was a strong promotion of the palm oil industry, and the plantations went beyond the territory allowed, even some in the core area. We now have over 8,000 hectares with African palm. And 16,000 hectares outside the reserve. The seeds of the palm trees travel through water They are transported either by mammals or by birds, and these plants grow in natural ecosystems, including mangroves. In the picture to the right, we can see a mangrove, but we can only see the palms, these palm trees that are 3 or 4 years old, and that's how they are distributed across the mangroves in La Encrucijada. Another threat is the unplanned dredging in rivers, canals, in lagoons and marshes. On the one hand, they apparently have some problems, but these lagoon systems are affecting mangroves. The social conflicts are also very relevant. Infrastructure works, including dredging upstream, are the result of an approach in which wetlands were not considered appropriate for development. So there was public investment to dry them and to turn them into cattle breeding areas. So it became a habit in the region to grow crops that are not appropriate on, and the people who settled in those areas are threatened by floods, and they are in permanent conflict with fishermen. This produced a conflict when restoration projects were implemented, because some communities or even people within those communities do not want restoration and some others do want restoration. This is a very important topic in all our work regarding mangrove restoration, and this is related to the lack of awareness, not only of the local population or of some part of the local population, but also of the members of the institutions and companies towards the ecosystem. And that's what produces deforestation and exhaustion of species. Here you can see some images and the effects of dredging works that have not been planned and that they are seriously affecting mangroves.
En años pasados, el equipo de la Reserva de la
In the
Biosfera
last years, the team for the Biosphere Reserve and civil society organizations and environmentalist societies in Mexico supported restoration projects, normally focused to reforestation campaigns with the communities, the cleaning up of marshes and surveillance. So some progress has been made and some areas have been recovered. The personnel knows about the reforestation techniques and the rehabilitation techniques for small marshes, but a lot of local fishermen know about these techniques for restoration, and there has been progress in the communities towards restoring the ecosystem. Nevertheless, given the problems that I have mentioned, in particular the emerging problem with the African palm, we need a different approach on how to tackle the mangrove restoration. We believe the first thing to be done is to recover the social tissue, that is to say, to restore the social tissue in the population so that the ecological restoration is feasible. For that, we have supported with we have started with the support of the UNESCO governance tables with people in favor and against restoration, or people with different interests, so that they can talk and we can prevent conflicts and we can start planning together. This also implies reordering of the use of this terrain. What are we going to do with the oil palm located in areas where they shouldn't? This could be simple. If they are not complying with environmental standards, they should be gone. But that's not easy, because for them to be established, there was a public-private investment for many years that is much higher than the investment that can be done by environmentalist institutions. So it has become a very strong economic alternative for local communities. So doing this reordering of the land requires a very fine plan with consensus from the production area and the industry of these palm oil trees. We need reordering upstream. It requires many infrastructure works, and we need then to work with city halls on how there is to be planning considering the basins and the ecosystems and the effects that the infrastructure is having, and how mangroves are actually needed in order to prevent and mitigate the effects of climate change. Now, going into more technical aspects, we need to set priorities for the rehabilitation of the hydric flow in the lacunar systems and less effort for direct reforestation. It is important as well, once this restoration is done, to protect the areas against fires. A good part of La Encrucijada mangroves is surrounded by los tulares and los copales, wetlands where people go to catch iguanas, deer, sweetwater deer, and turtles, and people set the location on fire so that the animals come out. So we need to protect with firewalls these areas so that they are not affected. This is the approach that we wanted to share with you. We want to thank all these organizations for their support in the Mangres project. Let me now share this image that I like very much. We're sharing knowledge. There's a children from a community, his grandfather, a fisherman, and a technical person from Encrucijada. We don't have a lady here, but women's participation is very relevant so that the restoration of mangrove becomes a reality. Thank you. Thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for your interesting presentation on La Encrucijada Biosphere Reserve. You are working with the communities, with this large population in the area that has made you to do all the work you're doing in order to guarantee for the future the existence of these very relevant ecosystems in the Biosphere Reserve, to see how to strengthen this approach that you have considered for the restoration of the social tissue, for then having better work on ecological restoration. As you will say, the governance tables that you have found more efficient to have a long-term impact on the land. I have liked very much to see how, in a similar way than Gabriela presented, you're having this holistic vision. You see that there are urban areas around, but not in the mangroves area, and you're considering the reordering of the use of this ground, the relevance of the hydric flow, sedimentation, the convergence of salty and sweet water or fresh water, improving the efficiency of restoration This way, not only reforestation that normally takes place, this will have impact and will help you to strengthen this terrain together with improving the social issues in the area. Now, let me remind you, you have this section for questions and answers. There you can write your questions, and we will cover them once we complete the third panelist's presentation. We will hear it now. We will hear from Lázaro Márquez. He's from the Guanacavives Peninsula Reserve. He has a degree in physics, but he has been working a lot in protected areas for decades in these protected areas, and he has a master's degree in environmental sciences, and he is the auxiliary investigator or researcher. He works at Guanacavives Peninsula Biosphere Reserve. So Lázaro, we hear you. Please, Christian, if you can share my presentation on the screen. We're going to do it this way because I'm having connection issues and issues with Zoom. I will be sharing it. Don't worry. Great. So I will introduce the management experiences we have related to nature-based solutions at the Guanacavives Peninsula Biosphere Reserve in Cuba. As I was saying, if I am cutting off, please be patient. It's very complicated from here. It fails often. So let's hope we have these 15 minutes with no interruptions. Thank you, Christian. Go ahead. All right, so our biosphere reserve is located at the Guanacavives Peninsula. We see it here on the map in the Cuban archipelago with shores in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico. This is very significant feature. We have in the south the Caribbean Sea, and on the north the Gulf of Mexico. And we have a strait of land, 240 kilometers away from our brothers in Mexico. Let me share some information about the zonification for our biosphere reserve. We have in total this amount of hectares. We have in transition area 6,000 plus hectares, in the buffering area 97,000, and the core area covers 52,000 hectares. This reserve has a relevant component of marine ecosystems, and the population is really small in comparison to the information we heard recently from our colleague Juan Carlos from the Mexican biospheres. Obviously, we have small population here. Inside the biosphere reserve, we have 1,684 inhabitants in the land area that covers around 1,000 hectares. And we always consider the amount of people living in 3 communities that are in the influence area, that is to say outside the biosphere, but very much connected to it. And we also cover them round about 50,000 more inhabitants. Our mangroves ecosystem, the one I'm going to be talking about, occupies 19,380 hectares, mainly in the north of the reserve. We have been working and planning to restore around about 30 hectares, but with recent assessments, And now with the possibility of having the support of this UNESCO project, we have identified that we could restore 60 hectares. It's not that we'll start with that from scratch. There are specific impacts that need to be worked in those 60 hectares. We have the 4 types of mangroves in Cuba, the red one, the black one, Patabayan. Here you have the scientific names of the species, and you see in the map the main areas to be focused with this restoration. What are the main economic activities that take place in our ecosystem? At Guanacavives Peninsula Biosphere Reserve, there is an important component or craft fishing at La Fe community in the north of the reserve. There is local fishing activities. There is a production of vegetal charcoal, but this has been reduced. There's less and less, but in some areas there's still vegetal charcoal being produced. The destruction of flora and fauna, crabs and other species, and there's a traditional activity that has been taking place for many years, the production of tannins for the leather industry. This has a tradition of this local community and communities that are not in our area. People from other places, users, if you want, they come to use the mangrove for tannins purposes. We have the local fishermen. There's a big public company, agroforestry company, with actions throughout the peninsula territory that also works in the place. And lately, as part of the ordering process for our economy, we have been including more and more micro private companies, micro and small private companies that have been increasing, and with certain actions, they have worked here at the territory, and we have been then started working with them as well. Next slide. The threats to this ecosystem. In the case of Guanacavives, we have natural threats, basically. They have to do with the fact that Guanacavives is a territory, as I said, the way it's geographically located, it's very vulnerable for hurricanes. It's very difficult to have a year without hurricanes. Intense hurricanes we have had in the last 15 years, at least 3 hurricanes of the top categories, 4 and 5, and some smaller hurricanes. So this is a problem that we face every year, almost. It has to do with the penetration of the sea, intense winds related to hurricanes, and the increase of salinity after the hurricane. After the hurricane is gone, all of these sea penetration changes totally the salinity in the coastline, and this kills the mangroves. And there are man-related impacts, inadequate use of the land, an overexploitation of resources, and also the contamination with liquid and solid waste. We have been working with this. We have been discussing responses, and we will tell you what we have been doing already in this regard. Here, I just wanted to point out that in our country, we have an extensive legal framework to protect the mangroves. I will only mention the main components. There are so many more, but this has been analyzed and it's almost ready. Another law 150 from 2020, the law for natural resources and the environment is the top law related to the protection of natural resources in Cuba and in general for the environment as a whole. And there are specific actions related to the protection of mangroves. We have Law 85, that is from 1998, the forestry, so-called forestry law, where mangroves are properly reflected for their conservation. There is a decree law 200 from 1999 about contraventions in relation to the environment. And here you see the different offenses related to these cases. We have also another decree, Law 2012 from 1999 for the management of coastal areas. And from 2017, we call it Tarea Vida, life task, the state plan for facing climate change, which consider the mangroves very relevant as they protect the coastal areas. Let me now show you what we have been doing in our humble experience in working in the restoration of mangroves at Guanacavives. Here, I'm showing what to do before restoring. First, we need to see if we're going to restore an area, we need to work with the control of invading exotic spaces where there is free space, as it happens to Juan Carlos at his reserve. You have these invading species that come up. It happens to us, and we have been cleaning this up. You see here the pictures of what we did. This is we have Marancu and Aroma Blanca, which are two local invading, colonizing species that colonize very fast the mangroves. And our local community close to the mangrove, we have poor management of solid waste mainly. And in some occasions, they use parts of the mangroves as a landfill for house or domestic residue. So this is what we have been doing, as you see in the pictures, with the participation of the communities in order to prepare the terrain. First, you need to prepare the mangrove before you restore it.
So how do we do this? What's our experience? What can we share with you? This is based on the experiences from the community. These are contributions from members of the community. There are some leaders, community leaders who are very active and who have indicating us what to do. From a scientific standpoint, we have tried to organize that knowledge, to gather it and to record it, but those are the ones who have the know-how. In the case of Rhizophora manglet, the most effective method and that they're using is the zero-till method. From July to December, they collect the propagation seeds and they are deposited in wet areas and they are planted, introducing the seeds between 3 to 5 centimeters, between 0.5 to 0.5. This method has worked quite well. This has been done financed by the regular activities funds, but with this, thanks to this project, we will be able to expand it to other areas and do this better with more scientific information, including tools, equipment for this work to be done more professionally, let's say. And another important aspect is that thanks to this project, we will be able to inform all these results and to use a scientific approach, even citizenship science. In the case of Avicennia germinianins and Lagunicularia racemosa, what we do is a different method. We collect seeds between July to December. The seeds are located on a blanket at ambient temperature on shaded areas for 3 or 4 days. And then there's the process where these seeds are planted using some herbs that and this is done in places where the community knows that the seeds will grow. I mean, the community has some kind of knowledge that there are about some places where the mangroves can be planted. That's part of the knowledge from the community, and community members have transferred this knowledge so we have used this scientific knowledge. So what have the main results been so far? Of course, this will expand thanks to the project. As a result of the main actions, we have been able to restore 6 hectares of Rhizophora mangle, 4 of Avicennia germinianus, and 2 of Lagunicularia racemosa. The area was cleaned thanks to the community members, including children and teachers. Forestry treatments have been implemented to generate mangroves and accelerate their growth. These processes was used for natural regeneration of mangroves. This was done thanks to this company that I was mentioning. And at the same time, we updated the database on sustainable forest management. This was one of the first things that we did because we needed a situational analysis of the mangrove first. As part of the work done, we prepared a brochure including some measures for the conservation of the littoral mangrove, especially for the community. We recovered the traditional knowledge of the local community, this knowledge that has been used by the community for ages. Some leaders have been restoring mangroves for many years. So what we did is include them. These are perhaps senior people who are very enthusiastic and are helping us to gather that information, and they are sharing that knowledge with us. We are working in the preparation of a protocol to monitor the current condition of the mangrove and their post-restoration evolution through citizen science. But we want local communities to empower themselves by gathering data in the field. This includes a specific protocol. They don't just go and gather data. They have to be explained and trained on how to do it so that data can be used appropriately. We are working on completing that protocol, and we will work with it later on to assess the current condition and also to assess the evolution of the mangrove after the restoration. And there's also a program that is the environmental management program that is for sustainable management, where community members participate as well as decision maker and other stakeholders working on mangrove restoration in the territory. So these are the things that we have been working on so far. The project has been very relevant for us, and there are some things that we had been doing before, such as the management plan for the biosphere reserve. But the project helped us expand and access lots of information. We've had a meeting with scientists in Colombia where we clarified several topics and we analyzed and discussed what tools to use so that this project becomes really successful and can continue in the future. So these are basically the topics we have been working on. These are the institutions that are cooperating with us. And this is the image of a mangrove that is the one that is best preserved. And I wanted to conclude my presentation with this image. Thank you. Thank you, Lázaros, for showing us those mangroves in the peninsula of Guanacabibes, which is not very well known. We are good with time, so I would like to invite the other panel members, Juan Carlos and Gabriela, please turn on your cameras so that we can start with the Q&A session. I have collected some have been already responded. And we have some others. I will start by asking one of the participants wonders about the methodology or the case studies for the restoration of the social niche and what to do in order to get this active participation from the community. In your cases, you have different experiences. One is related to more urban cases, one is related to a rural area with the most limited population. So perhaps could you tell us your view about this? We still haven't published anything. We are producing it. We are trying to analyze the theory on conflict management and social participation. And recently, we are receiving support from other governmental institutions because conflicts in this biosphere reserve in La Encrucijada include people from different sectors. The productive sector, such as the cattle breeding sector, such as the African palms producers sector, but also government officials and municipal government officials, and officials from the productive sector too, who promote agriculture and cattle breeding in wetlands, so as to reconcile interests. The economic activity had prevailed even over the conservation of nature. So we need the support from different institutions that have a higher hierarchy. In the case of Mexico, the government secretariat, and for Chiapas, the general government secretariat. We have resorted to them to invite these different sectors to the discussion table. We have had very few meetings so far with stakeholders for very specific activities. There is a site where there is a restoration process starting for 70 hectares, and they're helping us to invite neighbors from this place to be restored, so that they are convinced not to take cattle to these restored areas. But we will have broader discussion tables in some other areas. Thanks to the support of these government institutions, I think that we will document all that experience. We are generating working minutes, but it would be really interesting if some members of academia could participate to document all these things that we are doing and we will be doing in the next few years. We will focus on problem solving, and I'm sure we won't be able to create a book, but if some academic members of academia would like to join, they are welcome, of course. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Maybe Gabriela, you can share your methodologies and these things that relate to social fabric and your experience in more urban areas. Have you experienced the same conflict, or is it a conflict more related to the productive areas? Such as in the African palm. Have you seen any large differences in that urban setting compared to these more remote areas? Have you had any conflicts with this coexistence with natural ecosystems? Sometimes it's not just a green structure, but it's a gray structure. So what do urban people believe? Is it considered more friendly? Well, first of all, we are currently not working with communities. This project with communities is developed by UNDP, which is called My Costa. We have been identifying key stakeholders, not all related to environmental activities. And the process we undertook is to invite these stakeholders, both private and public, from my small and medium companies, not only related to environmental activities, but we wanted to invite these companies that could have an environmental impact in the city. Our process was based on the participation of these stakeholders, including analysis, proposal, priority setting. We consider the needs, the voices of all stakeholders involved in the management of the ecosystem. Of course, there were conflicts. For example, this rice mill conflict this is a stakeholder that never participated from the project. The government is working with them to transfer that contaminating source to some other area, or they are seeking to recover rice shells for other activities, but we haven't been in touch with them. That is why my message is that the connection has to be right from the beginning in order to increase the sense of belonging of all stakeholders, and so that the implementation includes all the needs right from the beginning. Sorry, but her connection is being cut. We, of course, we have produced different brochures. We haven't worked with the community, but in the project that would start in 2025, we have already considered different actions, including these methodologies. But we don't need to invent them in case of urban ecosystems, and there are good reference sources that can be extrapolated to marine ecosystems. Thank you, Gabriela. Lázaro, there's a question for you about the environmental regulations protecting mangroves in Cuba. But I think that a question has already been answered thanks to the new legislation that you mentioned. But what is not clear is because they were asking about the touristic activity. I think in this case, it is related to Guanacavives Peninsula. And perhaps you could elaborate on that and you could tell us whether you have information about other exotic species that can affect the mangrove ecosystem apart from the palm. Can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can. I mentioned the main laws or the main legislation in force regarding mangrove protection, but our problem is not lack of legislation. We have lots of things in place, but our problem is more related to the capacity of those in charge to make these regulations be complied with. But from a legislation standpoint, we are good, and mangroves are the ecosystems that have the strictest norms. As regards the touristic activity, Iguanacavive is one of the, it's a touristic site in the country, but it is mainly on the south part of the Piolis Peninsula, related to diving, to ecotouristic trails, but mainly, like I said, it's on the south where there's no large concentration of mangroves. However, there's a site, Calitalaquia, where there is a restructure or a lagoon system that has mangroves, and we take people to watch crocodiles. But, well, yes, in that case, there's a direct use of mangrove ecosystems with touristic purposes.
It was in general about other exotic species, invading species that you may have seen in your area. I have mentioned two that are the ones we have in Cuba, that they infest not only mangroves, but other pieces of land with vegetation. The case of marabou and aroma blanca. These are two species, local small trees that can very quickly colonize the spaces that are free, in particular in the borders of paths or trails where it's been deforested for some reason. They can quickly colonize the space. So what we have been doing, as I explained, is before we do any restoration work or reforestation in this case, what we need to do, and we do is to work with the invading species, try to eliminate them as much as we can so that we can have an effective restoration. Great, thank you. I also have here a few questions for Francisco Garcia. If you have made progress, Juan Carlos, on commitment from the producers of African palm in order to have an ecological balance. And if you want, you can tie this also after you answer this question about African palm. There's another question about where to find videos for native aquatic vegetation to be shared. And then we will hear from Gabriela and Lázaro. A specific commitment that was made with the palm oil industry by means of the companies extracting this oil from the seeds. There are many very close to La Encrucijada and the larger refineries at other areas of the country. An agreement has been signed with the Protected Areas Commission in order to support the eradication of invading plants, African palms in this case, in the protected areas. They're covering the operation from brigadists, and they're paying for brigades going into the mangroves in order to remove the plants, the small plants. You can remove manually the adult plants, requiring chopping off mechanically with electric saws or with an organic herbicide, because it's very difficult to go into the mangroves to eradicate the palm. They have this commitment in particular, and other commitments that are still being promoted, you know, in order to regulate plantations and to regulate the moving of seeds from the plantation to warehousing centers or distribution centers, and from there to the refineries or extracting companies, because some are lost that end up in the water bodies and from there to the mangroves. And there are no special plant nurseries working on this. When there is reforestation, the people work as from their homes, their own yards, or they take the seeds for restoration. It's very difficult to have a plant nursery or incubators that is central and then be moved through the reserve. So this is done, plant nursing, as from the reserves, and from there they are moved to the restoration areas. Gabriela, Lázaro, is there anything you have to share in this regard? We have a few minutes. A participant is asking about the education institutions. What is the experience of support activities that you have been doing together with them? It has to do with education for sustainable development. That's one of the main goals of the Mangrove project. If you can talk about your experience in this regard, and then we have one last question. Well, if you allow me, Juan, I can tell you. In our case, I think I mentioned it very quickly. We work with 9 education institutions at our territory in the Biosphere Reserve. Amongst them, we have 7 of them that are inside the reserve and other 2 that are in the area of influence. That is, they're nearby communities, and we work with them as well. And that's one of the most positive aspects and hopeful aspects that we have to share. In our case, in Cuba, to work with the education community is very easy, very nice. It's very motivating for us because there's a tradition of that, at least in the areas where there are protected areas. They have the tradition of working with the children, with teachers and the educators in general. Actually, there's a national environmental strategy considering this aspect. And that's one of the things that I can show you with the most proud and enthusiasm. We have very good results. The work we're doing with La Feba community, with restoration activities, children always want to participate. Sometimes we have to say no because they are very young, but those that are a bit older from the last years of primary school and all secondary school, and all of the teachers and professors participate with us in activities, training, and even the cleanups from solid waste. They participate together with the community. So it's really one of the most hopeful, motivating aspects that we have. Thank you so much. Now, Gabriela, any comments as from your experience in the project with the cities? Yes. In relation to this last question, I agree with Lázaro. The education system for the environment in Cuba is very strong, and by means of what we call circles of interest, we have worked in workshops with children and adolescents on environmental education, climate change, sustainability. We have worked even with little children doing drawings and their interpretation of what the mangroves are and how the climate change is affecting them. But I wanted to add a stakeholder that's essential, that is the university. We see them related to the processes for investigating the projects as from the beginning, and within the Manzanillo University and Camagüey University, working in other nature-based solutions, we work on nature-based solutions topics. I'm sorry, she's cutting off. We work in architecture, urban planning, as from higher education. These two universities have been very interested in these topics, and in Manzanillo, we have groups of volunteers that are students supporting the rehabilitation and restoration of mangroves within the city. Thank you so much, Gabriela. We will now be closing the activity. Let me first give the word to Cristian and Juana for wrapping up. There's one of the questions about the protocol for data gathering before and after the project. One of the specific features is that the very strong scientific component to mangroves, to the RES program. We have had a meeting to talk actually about the scientific side that has to do with what Gabriela was saying, the relevance of the participation of the world of academia, the university in this, looking for solutions. And it was mentioned around nature-based solutions, the difficulty to measure the impact, because many times the interventions are for the long term more than what you try to do with restoring. The ecological processes in ecosystems take longer. We're not going to talk about protocols here, but in the next coming phases, with the same mangrove project, that's one of the objectives, to measure the results. And it's been done on the side of the academia, not only around the Western paradigm, but we will talk about local knowledge and Aboriginal knowledge in relation to this approach and this perspective. I want to thank our speakers very much for sharing their experience. It's been so interesting. You've seen the participation with questions. Now, Christian and Juana, you have the floor to close this activity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juan. Juana, is there a comment that you have? And then I will be wrapping up the seminar. Well, the comment is to thank UNESCO for this effort. We know the preservation of mangroves and these coastal systems is something that we have to do at a global level. These ecosystems are very much affected and intervened, and they have a great incidence, perhaps not so directly seen by the people, but they are reservoirs for the nestling of different species and for the communities that live nearby. They are so relevant in relation to the keeping. So recently we had the World International Day of Mangroves. We are in the decade for restoring ecosystems. We have these warnings from these three big crises at the global level: climate change, loss of biodiversity, and contamination. And the mangrove is impacted by the three. Coastal systems are the most affected with climate change. We have seen this, and this is very relevant. And we see blue carbon or carbon sequestration and protecting vis-a-vis the risk of disasters, natural disasters. And then we see also disasters that have to do with human intervention. This series of seminars, I believe they're very relevant to raise awareness and to discuss what is going on at the level of our region, Latin America and the Caribbean. These mangroves are typical systems for in the tropical areas. They're very relevant. So we want to thank you for your participation as from UNESCO, and please stay with us with the series of webinars so that you can approach UNESCO as from your countries or regions in order to see how to cooperate better with everything that is done. Thank you, Juan. Now, Juana, is there anything you would like to share as from Bliss? Yes, as Juan was saying, it is very important to see this link, and the mangrove project has the scientific component. It's a scientific component that is applied directly to solving the problems that are faced in the mangrove ecosystems. And as it was well said, it's a fragile ecosystem. And we see how many ecosystem mangrove services reach the communities. So they are vital. It is vital for us to work together to bind these different pieces of knowledge and experiences. This is what we have been doing as from the meeting. We will start as from the needs of biospheres. That is our role and our north. This is how we will produce the different interventions together with the world of academia and the different institutions that are doing research and applying this type of sciences. Thank you, Juana. Now to wrap up, I want to thank our panel members for the quality of your presentations, for your generosity in sharing your experiences and approaches, and how you were able to integrate not only local communities living there as from their ancestors, understanding the role of the ecosystem in their livelihood, but also how we raise awareness for those that live in more urban contexts, but have a lot to learn about nature-based solutions offered by mangroves to respond to climate change, among other challenges. Juan and Juana both were saying the possibility of the project to see how to restore mangroves ecosystems, but also to appreciate the big contributions they have for response to climate change and the necessary adaptation that we need to have in our mindset in these times of global need that was discussed by the UN General Secretary. We are going to have a third meeting for local knowledge, indigenous knowledge for the recovery of mangroves and sustainable development. We will discuss these ways of practicing and preserving the mangroves ecosystem and how this integrates with the more academic views and the practices that are being carried out by the different communities. Having said this, thank you so much for being here today. We will have this video at UNESCO Santiago profile in YouTube, and we will remain available for all of you and anyone from other reserves that are even not part of the project. Please pay attention because we're going to share a lot of material that are going to be public to all of you, protocols, guidelines, and other recommendations that could help out other reserves in the region. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good day. Thank you.